many times in my career, figuratively and literally. But also SEMC and VAM conferences are where I interacted with people like my fellow panel members, one of whom, that guy, again, was kind enough or desperate enough to hire me in 1988 as curator of the Manassas Museum. Again, timing was everything. The museum system was poised to undergo considerable expansion in those years, and under Doug's tutelage and extreme patience, I got to play with artifacts, create school programs, write newsletter stories, design exhibit galleries, and even dig a grave in the rain, as he's already alluded to as well. So that one's classified. We can't really explain what happened with there. But anyway, during this period, my wife Diane and I had 2 children, bought our first home, and balanced all of it with our jobs. Now, this might seem like sort of an obvious thing, but I think it bears some attention. Many people, everybody, to some degree or another, in any walk of life, has had to often struggle to find the right balance between work and family. Every situation is different, but ultimately, I think they involve setting priorities and accepting trade-offs. For my wife and me, as you know, being as fully engaged as possible with the raising of our children was the most important thing, even to the point where it might compromise our careers. Simply stated, we felt there were lots of places that we could work, but that we only had one shot at getting the parenting thing right. Whatever regrets either of us have ever had about that decision, insofar as our careers are concerned, are swept away by the pride and the gratitude we feel for how our kids have turned out. And a few of you have been fortunate enough to meet them, and I hope you'll agree. After 6 or 7 years as curator of the Manassas Museum, though, I started thinking, you know, well, what might be that next stage in my career? And I applied for a job as director of operations at a newly developed Civil War site near Petersburg called Pamplin Park. I really thought I had a shot at that job. Alas, I got a call one day telling me that I did not get it. And then the next day, Doug Harvey informed me and the rest of the staff that he had gotten the job.
And if I could turn back to...
So, with Doug's departure, I became acting director of the Manassas Museum System and was eventually hired outright after a national search. And I was proud of that. The job wasn't handed to me. It was not an inheritance, if you will. I did earn it. And the next 5 years were good ones, mostly. To better capitalize on my new role, I participated in the seminar for historical administration, where both my knowledge and my contacts expanded. There's one of those contacts right there, right in front of me. The museum system continued to develop, and I became more involved in related areas like tourism administration, architectural preservation, got very much into institutional planning. And I also became a peer reviewer for AAM's museum assessment program. And like Tracy, I highly recommend that, not only as a way to, you know, sounds kind of elevated, give something back to the profession, but you can also derive a lot of useful information from being a map reviewer, by which I mean you can steal other people's ideas, which we do a lot in this profession.
I didn't put it that way, but...
No, but I was inferring.
That's what I meant.
But times in Manassas were not always happy. That sounds like the start of an opera almost. In my case, changes in the city leadership brought new pressures, especially from the new city manager. He paid me a compliment, actually, by wanting to make me an assistant city manager, which put me at a profound professional crossroads. I actually like, and this is where Doug and I probably diverge, I actually like local government. I like a lot of aspects of working in local government. And the change in jobs might have been more appealing had it come under different circumstances, had I not felt that I still had a lot I wanted to do as a museum director. And there's another aspect of this. In quick succession, Diane and I experienced personal loss with the deaths of my mother in 1999 and her father in 2000, one right after the other, really. With each of us having one remaining parent back in our native Shenandoah Valley, and with our kids advancing through elementary school, we wondered whether Manassas, for all of its many fine qualities, was the place to remain. And again, timing. On a snowy day in November 2000, I got a call from Keith Gibson, Executive Director of VMI Virginia Military Institute Museum Operations. And he said that the Newmarket Battlefield State Historical Park was looking for a new director. Did I know anybody who might be interested in the job? I did. I later learned that Keith was actually recruiting me at that point, which was another useful byproduct of years of networking and collaboration and having run into him at a lot of VAM and other functions, and having actually done a cooperative, an exhibit borrowing from VMI collection. So, 2001, headed back home to the Shenandoah Valley to run the first historic site my parents ever took me to as a child.
Aww. 3rd
grade field trip, you know, there you go. Diana and I lived and worked halfway between our surviving parents, my father in Stanton, her mother in Winchester, in a place where our children thrived. And for me, Newmarket brought more opportunities for professional growth, working with some great people, at least one of whom is in this room. But it was also a time of great challenges. September 11th, the DC sniper, which as we will recall had an impact far beyond just DC, even to the Shenandoah Valley. 2 wars, and eventually the impact of the recession. All of these wrought immense changes to the tourism industry, to other sources of our income, to endowment, performance. Many of us have been through all of what those things meant. And the battlefield's physical plan, which includes a museum and 9 other historic and modern structures, was in serious need of overhaul. The managerial relationship was complicated by the fact that the Newmarket Battlefield is 84 miles away from its parent institution, VMI, and receives no direct funding from the school. Although I am happy to say, I understand that that may be changing after, the thumb up in the back, good. This mark I have on my forehead from banging against the wall for 10 years apparently had some little bit of impact. So as I neared a decade at the Newmarket Battlefield, my thoughts again turned to what the next professional step might be. Always, sort of keep a running vision going forward beyond where you are. I did not throw resumes around right and left, but I did pursue a couple of positions that I thought were promising. In one instance, I was selected by the search committee of a particular organization, but the board of directors opted for someone else at the last minute. In another case, I ran afoul of a headhunter who stated rather bluntly that my association with a Civil War museum was a barrier to being further considered for the job to which I'd applied. Both of these experiences were demoralizing at the time, though in retrospect another old adage appears to be true: things happen for a reason. The idea of working for my alma mater, now the University of Mary Washington, had occurred to me back in Manassas when I was moonlighting for a couple of semesters as an adjunct instructor in historic preservation. However, I wasn't at a point where pursuing a PhD was feasible, and that's pretty much the union card if you want to pursue a serious academic career. So Mary Washington wasn't even on my radar screen until I saw an ad early in 2011 for the position of director of the James Monroe Museum and Memorial Library. At first I was doubtful, but then I started thinking about the prior course of my education and career and how it related to this opportunity. A historic preservation degree from the institution that administers the museum. Experience in institutional development, personnel administration, and working with students. Knowledge of how a small museum could evolve into something bigger. Plus, having spent 23 years in the Virginia retirement system as a municipal and state employee, I could reasonably expect, I do reasonably expect, to at least reach the magical milestone of 30 years service by working for a state university. And it was also more money, so that helped too. By this point, our son was a college sophomore and our daughter a high school junior. Big transitions were on the horizon for our family, so moving the household was not implausible at this stage, with so much already in flux. If our house would sell and if we could find a new one in this economy. In applying, not sure what's going on there.
That's April, that's D-Day.
Okay, good. Yeah. In applying for the James Monroe Museum job, I knew that I was sort of taking a leap off a cliff. By leaving a Civil War museum just sesquicentennial was moving into high gear, to work in a museum focused on an entirely different time period and subject matter. And yes, that question came up more than once in my interview process at UMW. But I was comforted by the fact, and related this to the hiring panel, that when it comes to being a director, the differences between museums aren't always as important as the similarities. Budgets, on the whole, are budgets. Staff issues are staff issues. And ultimately, I hope, leadership is leadership. They bought that. I started as director of the James Monroe Museum 8 months and 1 day ago, and I am freaking loving it. It has meant nearly a year of weekly commuting when my daughter finished high school, but the end of that phase is now in sight, and as some of you have heard me crow repeatedly, she will be a freshman this fall at the University of Mary Washington, following the footsteps of her dad and her mom. So there's symmetry for you there. And if anybody of you wants to move to beautiful Broadway, Virginia, I have a house that's next month we can talk. Now, I interrupt this narrative of my life with these important announcements. There are 2 documents that discuss career evolution, the career evolution of museum directors that have been very useful to me, and they're on the VAM website as handouts for this session. I gave them to Jennifer way after the deadline, and I apologize to her. In 2007, Charlie Bryan, Director Emeritus of the Virginia Historical Society, wrote a museum news article entitled "Stages in the Life of a Museum Director." Charlie describes 3 broad periods in a director's career arc that he calls the learning stage, the shaping stage, and the golden years, or a little more ominously, the gray years. And he talks about which one it could be. He relates the various elements of each stage, including the points where a director must confront the question posed by that well-known museum consulting firm and rock band, The Clash: should I stay or should I go? Now, the very next year, in 2008, John Wettenall, who's now executive director of the Carnegie Museums in Pittsburgh, delivered remarks at a meeting of the Association of Art Museum Directors titled "Impossible Job: The Changing Role of the Museum Director." Mr. Wettenall cited Charlie Bryan's article and generally agreed with his 3 stages, but he took issue with the rather large blocks of time that Charlie assigns to each one of his stages in the director's career. In Wettenall's view, the current era of instantaneous communication, budgetary pressures, and societal change have compressed the timetable for expectations of a director's performance and for the productivity of that performance by boards, staffs, and audiences. Wettenall defines 3 factors that directors must confront: time, the maturing of our industry, and that's his term, not mine, but in an odd way, maybe a little bit of a parallel to what we heard this morning in the town hall, and professional training. He makes a case for thinking outside the box in each of these areas. And I spoke to John Wettenall about this talk. I was actually a good scout and asked his permission to reproduce it. He was stunned that I took the trouble. And we talked about how directors have to confront all of those various areas, challenges, and sometimes unsuccessfully, especially in these times. And he did make a great observation. He said, we create disaster plans for our museums. We should also create disaster plans for our careers. Now, I commend these articles to your attention not only for what they have to say about museum directors, but also about other institutional roles and positions, and ultimately about museums themselves. And both have helped me put my career somewhat into perspective. As I reflect on how my career and my life generally has unfolded, I cannot honestly tell you that it followed some grand plan laid out at the beginning. And that's apparently true for all of us here in one degree or another. I have been truly fortunate to be presented with a series of opportunities that came pretty much at just the right time in each stage of my professional and personal life. Whether it was divine intervention or random cosmic luck, I really can't tell you. What I do believe is that my determination to be grounded in multiple aspects of museum work and related fields has helped prepare me for those opportunities when they arose. I've also benefited greatly from my professional network, and I continue to do so. So if I have any advice to offer that is relevant to this discussion, it can be distilled to those 3 things. Never stop learning, find your best balance between work and family, and make all the friends that you can. Oh, and the timing thing's good too. So there you go.
Any questions from the congregation? I guess so. All right. Ready to tackle change then. Thank you.